There's a little tiny hill right back there. This is Brian Turpicanic. I'm going to grow grass on that tiny little hill, intersprinkled in between all of those little flowers that I have planted there. So I'm sitting on the ground so you can see how steep the hill is. See, it's quite steep. It's not very tall. It's not a gigantic hill, but it is a serious slope. I'm going to show you how simple it is to put grass on a slope like that. Here we go. All right, first of all, if you're ever going to put grass seed down, the temptation is to put seed down and then water it. If you're going to be putting it on a hill, you can't do it in that order. When you put seed down, it's dry. The hill, dirt, especially if it's bare dirt, it's dry. And then if you go ahead and put water on it, it's just going to beat up and roll down the hill because the dirt is almost surely hydrophobic. If it wasn't, then you probably wouldn't be asking the question. This is basically the biggest, most important tip of them all. It's not. There's more. I'll get to it. But the most important thing out of the gate is water the hill before you put the grass seed down. Because just like anything in life, if you stick something dry onto something wet, it sticks. It stays there. And grass seed is no different. So we get that hill wet and then put the grass seed on it, it's going to stick to it. All right, now I barely got it wet. If I get it any more wet, then the water is just going to continue beating and rolling down the hill. So basically, I'm going to let it sit there for about maybe 2 minutes or so, and then I'm going to spray it again. And then I'll probably repeat that cycle 5 or 6 times. I want to get as much moisture to go into the soil, even if it's just the upper like 1/4 inch of the soil. That's all it really takes. I just don't want it beating up and rolling down the hill. That. I've already got water rolling down the hill. So that's too much water. I gotta wait. I gotta let it saturate in. All right, well, the water saturates into the soil. I'm gonna go grab my grass seed, and I'm gonna come back and spray it 1, 2, maybe 3 more times. All right, I got my grass seed here. I'm gonna go ahead and spray it down again. I should say, before I put this grass seed down, I'm doing this at the very, very end of the day. Basically dinner time. Sun is low in the sky over there. The reason for that is the soil is nice and warm. I'm watering, I'm getting moisture into the dirt. And by the time I put the grass seed down, the sun is down, so evaporative loss is going to be way, way less. But the seed is going to be sitting on moist soil. It's going to be absorbing moisture from the bottom up. Moisture is not going to be evaporating away because of the sun pounding on it. And then we're going to go ahead and cover everything up with a little bit of peat moss. Peat moss is kind of like an insulative barrier. It's kind of like a moist towelette sitting right on top of it, keeping everything moist and preserving the moisture in the seed and the soil. The peat moss might dry out, but everything underneath it won't. That way you don't have to spray a ton of water on it, because if you're spraying a ton of water onto a hill, it's all going to come down. We don't want to do that. All right, before I keep going, I got 3 bags of peat moss here. I have another bag up there. Each one of these bags ran me $6, $5.99 at my local hardware store. You could buy gigantic bags and be a little bit more economical with the money spent. But I didn't want to drive far enough to find a gigantic bag, so I just bought 4 small bags. If you're doing a gigantic hill, you're going to need those gigantic bags, but here for this small little space, these little tiny bags are just fine. You want to use a little bit of peat moss if you're seeding on a flat space, but on a very large space, you want to use a lot of peat moss. And the reason that you're using a lot of peat moss is because you want it to retain a lot of water, because on a hill, you don't want to have to water it very often. Again, the more you water on a hill, the more the water runs down. If the water is running down, then that means your grass seed is eroding down the hill. It's not going to root in evenly. We want to limit the amount of watering that we have to do, so we use a lot of peat moss, a thick layer. Now we just keep going through this process over and over and over all afternoon into the early parts of the evening. What I hadn't said yet makes a big difference. You're not going to want to do this going into summer. So don't do this at the end of spring. Don't do this during summer. Do this coming out of summer, going into fall. The reason for that has everything to do with evaporative loss. You guessed it. May and June, very into spring, the days are crazy long. Depending on where you live, it could be 15-hour long days. During the summer, days are crazy long and they're extremely hot. So evaporative loss from May through August is crazy. But by the time September and October rolls around, days are at least equinox, so equal day and night, or they're pushing into shorter days than nights. That means the sun is lower in the sky, you have lower sun intensity, and the soil is still warm. It doesn't really matter if the day is shorter. The soil is still warm enough for everything to germinate. Again, it's all about keeping moisture in the soil, in the seed, without having to spray water on the space. Here, as I'm doing this job right now, it is September 25th. This is the end of the first week of fall. I'll have the seed down today, and by October 1st, I'll have germination. Luckily, I won't have to water it very often because it's October, so I'm not going to have a whole bunch of erosion coming down the hill. And as that seed germinates, erosion becomes less and less of a concern. Even that teeny tiny amount of spray that I just did right there, I still have water coming down the hill near the bottom. So although the hydrophobic nature of the soil is waning, like I'm getting moisture into the dirt, it's still there. I can't water it very much. But at this point, if I put the seed down, it's gonna stick to it, and that's what I want. Here, I'll zoom in. Seed. All right, I'm going to take you up close. All right, so right here, I've got seed stuck to the dirt on the hill. The seed is not adhered to the hill. It's just lightly stuck there. I will not spray this with water. But what I will do is I'm going to cover it up with peat moss. Then I can spray it with water, barely. All right, now once you put peat moss on top of the seed, I want you to notice that you can't see any of the seed anymore. It's fully covered up. Now, if I start sprinkling this after a couple days, you are going to be able to see the seed because the peat moss kind of settles down, compacts, opens up space as the seed emerges, and you can kind of see some of it. So we're going to be having to add extra peat moss on top of this a couple days from now. However, before we do that, we need to tamp this down a little bit, because if a wind comes, everything is too loose. Even if I go ahead and spray water on it, and then a few hours later it starts drying out, wind blows, I don't want that to affect the seed. We don't want the seed to move. So I'm going to go ahead and tamp this down with a dry foot and a dry paw, get it as flat and tamped as possible. Then I'll water, and then I'll add more peat moss on top. Try your best to keep your cats off of the area. Harry, what are you doing? Come in. Go on. All right, here everything is largely tamped just enough. I'm going to add a little bit of water, and then I'm going to put more peat moss on it to get the peat moss even thicker. Don't want to put too much water on it because we don't want any water beating up and rolling down the hill. So if you look over here, we got water rolling down the hill where there's no peat moss. But over here, nothing is happening. The peat moss absorbs the water very, very quickly and holds onto it like a sponge. Because it's wet, we can add more peat moss onto it and thicken the layer out. All right, now the idea here is the peat moss is going to hold in a lot of moisture. The seed is underneath the peat moss, and the seed can push up through the peat moss very easily once it actually starts germinating and putting up its first sprouts. Underneath the peat moss and underneath the seed is moist, wet soil. All of that moisture in that soil, none of it is going to evaporate because it's got layers of damp, wet peat moss sitting on top of it. Everything under the seed is going to stay wet, and underneath that seed, that wetness is going to make the seed absorb all of that moisture, and it's going to kickstart the germination process. It's going to put out a taproot, it's going to put out a shoot. Once the shoot finally starts emerging out of the ground, then the soil, like the actual like native soil that's here, going to start accepting moisture into the root profile much faster. When you have bare soil, water wants to run off of it. But when something is growing in that soil, the soil sucks the water down into the root zone. Nature's way. I didn't make the rules. So this little section right here, I just did that on camera. I'm going to do that for the rest of this small hillside. It's not a lot of space, but when you've got a steep slope, you have to treat the space as if it's a gigantic space. You got to baby it, you got to give it all of your attention. Once this space is in, I will never have erosion again. So it makes all the sense in the world for me to dedicate an entire day's worth of energy into making sure that this spot grows in very good. Because if I can get this spot to grow in very good, then I never have to worry about it ever again. All right, I'm going to do the rest of the hill, and then I'll show you the after shot about a week from now. All right, this is evening, September 25th, 2024. In case you're wondering, it's the same grass seed that I put down up here. It's a sheep fescue, which is a fine fescue. Right up there, I still have weeds. The grass is not old enough for me to kill the weeds out, so I'll get to that eventually. There's my shadow. Hi. All of the sheep's fescue will go in here in between all of the flowers, and sheep's fescue does not have to be mowed. It is a turf grass. You can mow it, but you don't have to. It doesn't get too big, so it ends up being a nice fluffy ground cover. That's the plan for this little area right here. All right, 6 days has passed. It's October 1st right now, and I'm just barely starting to get some germination here on the hill. Very first sprouts. A whole bunch of little sprouts all over the place. I literally saw the very first one yesterday afternoon, but, you know, there was like one. Now they're everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and water this one more time this morning. We're still in the shade, so then I don't have to worry about it again, probably for another 5 hours or so until the sun comes around the corner of the house. Remember, we don't want to water it very often. As you can see, erosion can happen. The more you water, the more likely erosion will happen. So we want to water infrequently and never too much at once. Here's another example of how over the course of days, the peat moss starts, I don't know, it's not like it goes away or decomposes, but as it settles, we can start seeing bare dirt underneath. So up here, I don't really have any germination, so I'm going to dust that with a little bit of extra peat moss. That's pretty much it. That's all I need. That'll keep it moist for a good handful of hours more. Dust a little bit more peat moss here. I'm pretty sure this seed will eventually pop, but it will lag behind the rest of the hill where the peat moss is spread thicker. All right, here we are 8 days since I put the grass seed on the hill. Everything is really coming in nicely. I'll show you what it looks like. This is still morning, September 3rd. As you can see, we've got a nice green haze, very uniformly everywhere. Base of the hill, up the steep slope, all the way to the tippy top, in between all of my plants. Got a handful of weeds that I'm going to have to manually, like seriously, just pull weeds out. You don't need to wait to spray herbicide. If you can grab a weed and just pull it out, you never have to worry about it again. Anyway, there's grass pretty much everywhere. I don't have any thin spots. I would still say of all of the thin spots, this is the most thin. I had intended on putting down a little bit of extra peat moss here, even set it on camera, but I never got around to it. As you can see, it's all coming in anyway. I'd like to make sure that you see this. Everything here is still moist. Everything here is still wet. We're talking it's about 10 a.m. Now, granted, I'm in the shadow of my house, but it's 10 a.m., early October, and I haven't watered this morning. The last time I watered this was yesterday evening. There's my cat again. Not on the baby grass. Go, 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 go. And that's what I want to leave you with here, is what time of day do we water? So during the germination period, you absolutely have to water at dusk. And the reason for that is if you're putting water on the grass seed, on the peat moss at dusk, the sun is not going to be hitting it all the way through the night. You're talking like 12, 13 hours straight where there's going to be almost zero, if not zero sun hitting the soil. That is the best way to maximize your water usage. And then by morning, you're going to want to wait all the way until the sun is finally hitting the peat moss, and you can start to see the color change of the peat moss as the peat moss dries out. Water it one more time to keep it damp for as long into the day as possible. At that point, you probably could be just fine waiting all the way until dinner time again and getting the grass seed to germinate with just 2 watering sessions every day. Because I work at home, I actually gave it extra water once or twice, barely. We're talking a spritz in the middle of the day just to make sure things didn't dry out too much. But even if I hadn't, everything would still germinate. It just might take an extra day or 2. Now that I've got grass growing, I'm not going to continue documenting this for the sake of this video, because watching grass grow is kind of right up there with watching paint dry. Everything is here, everything is growing, it's going to continue growing and maturing. You can watch other videos on this channel where you can see this grass once it's fully mature, probably in 2025. But once you do get to this point, you literally don't need to water this very often. I'm going to water this 2 times a day for the next 3 days. That's going to take me up to almost 2 weeks. And then I'm going to start watering it once a day. And we're talking only at dusk, because I want to maximize the use of that water. If I put it down at dusk, everything stays moist for more than 12 hours straight. In my case, 15 to 16 hours straight, everything stays wet with 1 watering session. And my watering session, you've seen it, when I pick up my hose, it takes me 30 seconds, maybe, and that's it. Now, since you're watching this video, you're probably putting grass seed down on a hill, which means you're going to have grass growing on a hill before long. I do have a video here on this channel dedicated to the topic of mowing grass on a hill, how to do it correctly, safely, bestly. For here on this tiny little hill, I'm not going to be mowing it because it's sheep's fescue. You can watch this video right up here about mowing on a hill. And if you're curious about what sheep's fescue is and how I can get away with putting the grass down but never mowing it, watch this video right here all about fine fescues, sheep fescue.